Well, good morning. Welcome back to the Broadcast Retirement Network. I'm Jeff Snyder. This is BRN AM for Friday, December 3rd, 2021. And our top story today, detecting and treating Alzheimer's disease. Well, joining me now to discuss this and a lot more is Dr. Konstantin Lyketsos. He's the director of the Johns Hopkins Memory and Alzheimer's Treatment Center. Kostas, it's great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us on the program this morning.
Oh, I'm delighted to be here. Thanks for having me.
And we're really going to get down and talk about Alzheimer's, which is a really debilitating disease. My first question is, how pervasive is this disease when you look across U.S. society?
I think it's important to consider that it's related to how old somebody is. So if you look, for example, at younger age groups, and by that I mean under 60, under 65, it's quite rare. And the broader term being dementia, which is the umbrella term that encompasses Alzheimer's, that maybe affects 1% or less of people under 60, 65. Now, between 65 and 75, though, the numbers go up. And by the time you're talking about everybody over 80 and older, it's about a third to 40% of everyone has dementia. And most of that is caused by this brain disease we call Alzheimer's.
So how do caregivers, and many people in our audience, as we discussed before the show, they may be mature, they may be younger, they may be caregivers, they may have a family member. How do we identify, or what are the symptoms that we should be looking for either among ourselves, when we're just our routine day to day, or if we're taking care of somebody in our family?
Right. There are three kinds of symptoms. And by symptoms, we mean mostly things that are different or that are changes that don't reflect where the person was, say, a couple of years ago. So the one are the memory or cognitive symptoms, repeating things a lot, forgetting appointments consistently, losing things. Those kinds of memory symptoms are worth noting. Another common symptom early on is trouble getting around with the car, maybe getting lost, getting confused, or befuddled. Other examples of cognitive symptoms, mixing up words, having mental blocks when trying to explain things, or using lengthy words, many words to describe where a single word would have fit. So that's one group of memory cognitive symptoms. The other are what we call functional symptoms. And so these reflect to everyday living, having trouble handling money, getting the taxes put together, shopping, driving from the functional point of view. And in more advanced stages, having trouble choosing clothes to wear for the weather, putting clothes on and off, or even more basic self-care. And then the third group are the behavioral symptoms, things like new irritability, new depression, anxiety, trouble sleeping, somewhat unexpectedly in a 75-year-old. So those are the three groups of symptoms.
And this goes beyond just, look, I forget things. My wife tells me something, I forget it. But this goes beyond just general forgetfulness. This is pervasive, it's consistent, it's continuous. So you're constantly noticing this over a period of time. Is there a length of time? Is it like, for example, over 3 weeks, a month, 6 months, a year? It's just consistently happening.
Yeah, so any time frame like that is somewhat arbitrary. But when I'm seeing a person who's had those kinds of symptoms, if it's going on for less than 6 months, I take a different approach than if it's more than 6 months. So I'd say that's roughly the mark, but it's an arbitrary mark. It could be that someone, for example, develops the symptoms after a stroke. That happens within minutes, if not shorter. And in that instance, very quickly, you can make a case the person has dementia. It's just that the cause happened suddenly, the stroke.
When you talk about causes, do we, and you and your team do an extensive amount of research and an extensive amount of treatment, do we yet know the cause of Alzheimer's? And for example, is it head trauma? For example, did I play football or play lacrosse, since you're in Baltimore, our hometown, my hometown? Is there a rhyme or reason as to what precipitates this?
Yeah. So think about three levels. One are the symptoms we just talked about. The other is what we see in the brain of the people who have the symptoms. And then the third level is how did that stuff get to be there? So in Alzheimer's, the people who have the symptoms, we say that they have Alzheimer's because in their brain, we see these abnormal proteins that we call amyloid and tau. And the question then is, how did they get to be a lot of amyloid and tau in the brain of these people? One way is genetic. So there are direct genetic pathways. Some unfortunate people inherit one of these bad genes. They make a lot of amyloid protein throughout their life, and at a young age, they get a dementia and Alzheimer's. But other ways of getting it is that possibly you have a head injury. Some people, and I really want to emphasize that some people with a head injury many years later might go on to get amyloid in their brain as a result of the head injury. But most of the time, we don't really know. We don't really know how the amyloid and tau is showing up in the brain. And there are other relatives of Alzheimer's, something called FTD or frontotemporal dementia, people might have heard of, or DLB, dementia with Lewy bodies. Those have different proteins in the brain, and we also don't know how those got to be there. And that's the opportunity for science in the long term, because addressing how those proteins get there is going to make a difference, we think, down the line to the symptoms.
Yeah, and our brains obviously is so complex, and I guess we're going to get to this in the second segment. We'll talk about some of the research. And as I said, we need to take a very quick break. When we come back, we'll talk about some of the latest research around Alzheimer's and some treatment as well. You're going to want to stay tuned right here on BRN AM. Imagine a new television network that will make you richer, healthier, and in control of your financial future. This network is for the policewoman in Nashville, Tennessee, the baker in Dubuque, Iowa, the teacher in Lexington, Kentucky. We want to make the idea of savings and retirement culturally relevant. But what do you see as a defining issue of the midterms, especially for the smaller businesses? I mean, they are the lifeblood of the American economy. Featuring exclusive interviews, current affairs, and docuseries. 33 years old, you retired early.
The philosophy is money only matters if it helps you live a life that you love.
But you got to start thinking about retirement as soon as you get in.
The Broadcast Retirement Network will drive very high engagement with premium partnerships. So this isn't retirement and savings for your parents or grandparents. This is for all Americans. And we're going to change the way you think about money. Welcome to the next frontier of retirement and savings. This is BRN, the Broadcast Retirement Network.
Are you over 50? Would you like to get up to 33% more income in retirement? Then call now for this free book, Annuity Do's and Don'ts for Baby Boomers. This free book reveals little-known secrets about annuity strategies that will help you make the right choices before buying an annuity. Call right now for your free book, and as a bonus, we'll also throw in a free annuity rate report, both absolutely free, for calling Annuity General today.
Call 800-504-8194.
Welcome back. We're talking this morning to Dr. Konstantin Lyketsos. He's the director of the Johns Hopkins Memory and Alzheimer's Treatment Center. Kostas, thanks so much for staying with us this morning.
Yes, it's my pleasure, Jeff.
And as we went to break, we talked about the complexity around the human brain and researchers like yourself really trying to figure out all the aspects of the brain and how this disease come about. What's going on with some of the latest research? Where are you and your colleagues in the field are in terms of identification and treatment?
So there are a lot of advances in genetics. There are these very large, tens to hundreds of thousands of people studies that tell us that there are probably 30 to 50 genes involved, each of them contributing a little bit to the risk. And that means that there's no single gene or gene test that you could do to tell you what your risk is. And the genetics eventually will tell us clues about how these proteins, for example, get to be in the brain. The other advances in research have to do with diagnosis. So we now have pretty good brain imaging tests called PET scans that can tell us how much of these proteins are in the brain of an individual. But PET scans are expensive. They involve a little bit of radioactivity. So the field is moving to other tests. One of them is called a CSF test. That takes the fluid out of the back, the fluid that bathes the brain, and looks at the proteins in it. And where we're probably going to be in the next 2 to 3 years, we might guess, in blood tests. So what we want to have is blood tests that tell us how much amyloid or tau is in the brain. So diagnosis is a big direction.
And in terms of treatment, where are you and your colleagues with treating this awful disease?
So there are two kinds of treatment research. One is what we call care research, and that's taking what we know now without major advances and making sure that it's widely used, because we know that if we diagnose you early, that if we implement certain treatment protocols, that you're going to do better in the long term. Maybe it's more activities, more structure in the care environment. Maybe it's a happier caregiver. So care research has advanced substantially compared to when I started 10 years ago. And the goal right now is to make it better and make sure that it's being used. The other big development is research that is trying to get rid of these proteins out of the brain, the amyloid and tau, and also address other causes. The field's made a lot of progress in amyloid. We're pretty good right now at removing amyloid from the brain. The challenge so far, though, is that hasn't proven to actually help with symptoms. And it's a very controversial issue. We had a drug approved by the FDA earlier in 2021. It's called aducanumab. Aducanumab's pretty good at clearing these amyloid proteins from the brain, but doesn't seem to help symptoms, at least in people who have symptoms. So a long way to go with other medicines like it, and maybe delivering this drug a lot earlier before symptoms, so that the amyloid is removed before it has a chance of causing the symptoms.
When you're talking to family members and caregivers, are there expectations that you need to set? Obviously, we're not at a cure stage. There's a lot of research, as you said, ongoing on mapping the brain, finding out the causation, and also creating the treatment. But do you have to set some type of expectations like, and this has got to be one of the hardest parts of the job, I would think, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, but dealing with the family member, helping them cope with this.
Yeah, well, it's usually a collaborative process, telling the person or family member a diagnosis. And for many people, I'm not telling them it's something they didn't know because they've lived with it. And so part of the expectation is make sure people understand why we're making the diagnosis and what it means for the future. How fast is it going to progress? What can we predict about what's going to happen next? So that kind of education is very important. I think, though, the most helpful message is what I call a message of hope, which is this is not something that's going to, for most people, unfold overnight or even in a year or two. So it's an opportunity to set up a care environment that maximizes the situation for the patient and the family. So that's what we do in our center is we stand by the caregiver and the patient, making sure that we optimize the situation at any point in time. We treat symptoms. We help them deal with crises. We make sure the caregiver experiences mastery. And probably, and this is maybe one thing I want to leave for you toward the end, one of the studies that we did years back in Utah suggested that if the caregiver feels close to the patient is going to do very well. And the difference between a caregiver not feeling close was as much as 2 or 3 years in difference of how long the patient lived. So a lot of what we do emphasizes that bond between patient and caregiver. Want it to be real strong because a caregiver who feels very strongly towards the patient's going to do better, which is why I tell all the guys, make sure you're nice to your wife because most of the time, that's your wife who you want to feel close to you if you are unfortunate enough to have dementia.
Yeah, that absolutely. And at the end of the day, it sounds like there are great drugs, great treatments, great research, but it's about the communication and the warmth, the human touch. And it's interesting that all the science which is important, but a lot of it comes down to that human element.
Absolutely. And the belief that you can do better.
That wraps up this episode of BRN AM. Have a topic of interest that somebody you think we should talk to? Drop us a line. And don't forget, for all the information in retirement markets, technology, personal finance, so much more all in one place, check out today's edition of our daily newsletter, The Morning Pulse. Want to see all of our latest content or search our archives? Visit Roku, Samsung, and Amazon, as well as over 100 different streaming platform partners. We're back again tomorrow, this time for BRN Weekly. I'll be joined by a very special guest, and we'll take a look at some of our best segments for the week. Until then, I'm Jeff Snyder. Stay safe, keep on saving, and don't forget, roll with the changes. Now is your opportunity to co-create content around any topic on the first lifestyle and wellness network. Reach a global audience through our platform and co-own exclusive branded content. All of our programs are available on demand and also as audio-only podcasts, so you can take us on the go. Broadcast Retirement Network, available anytime, anywhere, and on any device.
Are you being audited and do you owe the IRS $10,000 or more in back taxes? Is the IRS threatening to take more of your money? Don't fight the IRS alone. The Tax Doctor is here to help you negotiate your tax bill and reduce your stress. The IRS can freeze your assets and seize your bank accounts, but you can stop these IRS actions. The Tax Doctor will work with you using our years of experience to represent your case to help you get the best resolution under the IRS guidelines. Help is here to deal with the IRS to reduce your stress. We've handled thousands of cases, so we know what we're doing. If you owe $10,000 or more in back taxes, do not call the IRS alone. Call a Tax Doctor now for a tax emergency analysis.
Call 800-224-6439.